Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Scott Parker Goes Live. For those who don't know me, I've been called a covert human rights campaigner. Others, I expect, describe me more as a social entrepreneur and thought leader who invented the first business-owned disability network and has a long career persuading senior executives that treating people properly, including people with disabilities, is good for business, and then showing them how. Some argue that I have supped with the private sector devil so long, with that famous long spoon, that I have in fact gone over to the dark side. Whatever you call me, after some 30 years hacking away at this, I'm still asking the questions that I think really matter. Why is it so hard to get "and what about disability" into the ethical and responsible AI debate? Why do so many of the diversity managers who describe diversity as a choice choose not to tackle disability discrimination? And since when is treating people fairly and with respect defined as a choice? Well, I guess you could argue not robbing a bank is a choice. Why do we have health conditions and it's other people who have disabilities? And why do we just take it for granted that HR practitioners don't have a clue about the impact of disability discrimination on, well, their human resources? I don't know about you, but I expect a doctor to know the difference between your elbow and your knee. And with all that said, let's dive into this episode.
Of course, where else to start but with the amazing Caroline Casey. And I thought actually I would start by introducing each other. So I'm going to ask you to introduce me, and I'm going to introduce you. And then we're going to start a conversation that actually talks about what are we, and why are there so few of us, and how does it work, and questions like that. Okay?
Sounds good, but I mean, how do I introduce you? Because there's Susan Scott Parker, what you do and what you've been doing for decades, and Susan Scott Parker, who personally means so much to me. So I think maybe I should start with what you've done. When I came into the disability space in 2001, I heard that there was one person's name that was going to be very important to me, and that was Susan Scott Parker. So for me, really, that you are the founder of, obviously, business disability inclusion, that is what you are. You have been the light around how we help business to become confident, because you are the person who came up with disability confidence. Be confident in integrating and including disability inclusion right across the supply chain. You are the founder of one of the leading organizations. And when you left that a few years ago, you have then taken to a more global stage in bringing years and decades of expertise to advising organizations like the Valuable 500, the ILO, many countries. And you have been involved in setting up task force from AI or inclusive AI to procurement. You speak regularly. You're kind of the voice that we all turn to. And to me personally, say you're like my other mother. Susan Scott Parker is my mom in the last quarter of a century of my life. You've picked me up when I felt it's too hard. You have been my greatest advocate in the Valuable 500. We laugh together most. We have the conversations, the real conversations about how hard this is. And I think my relationship with you is glorious. It's something I hugely value. So you're both a founder of all things disability business inclusion, but you're the very strong and warm and welcome hand on my back.
I mean, I hadn't intended an introduction to turn quite that way, but thank you very much. And so if I was introducing you, I would focus on things like when we met, you started by bringing chief executives together. Remember, I was saying it took me 15 years to get chief execs at the table, and you started backwards. Chief execs.
Yeah.
From climbing on an elephant. Remember, we teased you in the 2000 event that you were on a bus. Actually, you just thought it was an elephant because of your I was at my comment. But of course, most recently, you've gone down this journey called, for the first time in history, getting 500 chief executives to nod and say, yep, we should be talking about this as a board level priority. And so I'm not going to go into whether I'm your mother or not. I think in terms of this conversation for this audience today, I'm going to pass that one by a little bit. But I do want to jump to actually, so what are we? Because you talk about the decades that we've been doing this. When I was thinking about these podcasts, I realized that for some people, the fact that I've been called a covert human rights campaigner would capture their interest, because this was a business leader who, when I was celebrating the introduction of the Disability Discrimination Act in the UK, said, "Susan, your pink slip is showing." But that's when we had a group of companies coming together in an alliance with the disability rights movement and the trade unions, pushing for legislation that would have credibility in the eyes of both business and disabled people. So, covert human rights campaigner, is that what you are? Some people, I suspect, think that we're shameless PR agents for nasty private sector operations, just pretending to be good. Social entrepreneurs, there's actually an English Society for the Protection of Greek Donkeys. Well, presumably, I could have ended up in the nonprofit sector, but on some different sort of theme. So if you're asked, what are you? This extraordinary history of yours, what are you?
With human beings, it's actually probably everything that I do. What am I is very different conversation to what is it that I do. And as a 52-year-old, I can really separate that out. It took me a long time actually to separate what I do and who I am. But I do, what I would say is I've been given titles like social entrepreneur, social innovator, adventurer, businesswoman. And then in 2010, when I did a TED Talk, do you know that the label they gave me then was an activist? And I was like, what? Really? And, I remember pitching the Valuable 500, and somebody said to me, "But Caroline, you're a campaigner and an activist. You're not a business person." And I actually, like yourself, was like, what, really? Because the work that I did was to work with business as a business. But now I can really stand back and say, yeah, I am an activist. And yes, I am a campaigner as part of my carpet bag of tools that I use. But I really think what I might bring to the table is I'm also a communicator and a creator of visions and strategies that connect at two levels. One is at the heart level of being a human being, and then also as a business imperative. And I really create visions and I convene at quite a large scale. So maybe, Susan, I am an activist and a campaigner, but there are many, one thing I've been known to say is labels are for jam jars, not for human beings. And I've always been I always challenge about the idea we should be defined only by one thing, because we shouldn't, because we grow and we evolve. And I actually think definitions about humans is what actually limits us. So I think I'm many things, and I hope I'll be many more. But right now, in this moment, I think I am a global activist, campaigner, businesswoman, and mostly positive troublemaker. That is definitely what I do. I like to positively disrupt systems.
But as I'm listening to I'm thinking, when you're saying you don't like to be in a single category, but in the context of the work we do, there's a deep-rooted assumption that actually the world of disability and the world of business are so separate that there's this cavern between. Whereas as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, yes, you're an activist, but you're grounded in the reality of business. Grounded, right, in the reality of business and in the reality of what it means to have a disability, and in the reality of that bigger context, which is an entire society that really doesn't know what it's doing in this domain. Yeah.
But I think that is probably the most important point, is that when I came into this field, I come out of the disability closet. I was working with Accenture as a management consultant. I'd never told them I was registered blind and had ocular albinism. And truly my naivety was, oh, sorry, what do you mean disability and business are separate? I mean, and even to this day, I think, Susan, one of my, my frustration when I hear organizations like McKinsey say that disability has no materiality to business. And I'm like, I'm just like, I'm so shocked at that, because when we speak about, just less some statistics here, the very basics of 1.3 billion people with a lived experience at this moment, with 2 people that might love them, that's 54% of the global economy. Then we add in the grey tsunami, as we speak about. How can you say the disability has no materiality to business, when then we even look under the bonnet of innovation and insight and see that some of the greatest innovations, like touch screens that we all use in iPads and phones, actually was an innovation for the disability community, let alone text messaging and remote controls. I was so naive in it, and I'm quite glad that I remain naive in that, because there is no gap between disability and business, no gap.
That McKinsey thing is fascinating. 20% of the workforce inside McKinsey will have disabilities or a health condition of some kind.
Absolutely.
They're saying their own people aren't material to their business. They've got the fact that 1 in 3 people aged 50 to 64 will have a disability, and the average boardroom age is 64.5. So you've got board members with disabilities. You've got customers with disabilities. You've got, it's a failure to understand what it means to be human. And the same company will talk about human capital instead of beings, and they don't understand the human. And of course, in the context of disability employment, I'm wandering around now talking about badly trained HR who just don't understand the human dimension to human resources. Because
I wonder, Susan, do we put that, before we give the HR people a hard time here, because I want to, before we even think about that, what about the leadership of the business, understanding the business is done by, with, and for human beings, to which you rightly said the disability experience is part of, an extraordinarily huge part of the 8 billion people on the planet. Perspective, the choice to the top creates the culture, the decisions, the investment of the business. So it's not even just a HR issue, it is strategically part of how a business understands and operates the market it is selling to.
And so McKinsey's are, for me, an interesting almost insight into what makes it. When I started thinking about this podcast, remember you said, well, our big message should be, we're both still standing.
Just about.
Both been watching McKinsey's flounder around in this territory forever while charging thousands of pounds a second for breathing or whatever, or their PowerPoints. That's what they're particularly good at. But the question takes us back to you and to me, I guess, in the sense that why don't we know thousands of people who do what we do? I was thinking, if I brought everyone who's done the kind of work that you and I do together for this, we'd only have 3 or 4 or 5 people on the screen. There are very few that have actually bridged this gap, this understanding of the impact of disability on business, the potential to mobilize business to do better itself, and as allies of disabled people. So the question is, well, what is so different about our approach? What's so different about our world or the way that we work? Why aren't there more of us around?
I think there are becoming more and more of us with the same reason to exist, which is we are saying you will be a better business when you include and integrate disability into your business. And it is our job to help business see that opportunity, right? So for me, when everything that I do was, I'm here in my mind to serve the global inclusion of people with disabilities, or to end the global exclusion, and business is the vehicle for that, but in a win-win relationship. And I think first, I don't know how about you, but when I first bebopped into the system and came in, I was accused, as you said in your opening, of being a dirty PR machine for the dirty capitalism of business. And people didn't understand that it was, no, not at all. It's that I truly believe that business is the most powerful force on the planet. And how can I help business help itself, but most importantly, end disability exclusion by the way it operates, because what it values, society follows. I am definitely seeing more of those kind of system leaders than when I came in. And some of them are taking pieces of it. But to answer why are there not more? And actually more in the businesses. So why do we not have more activists in the business saying that? The answer is, and it still remains the same, is because when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in businesses, it's still siloed. And disability still falls off the edges. It is still seen as the one that will get a lower return on investment. And for me, that's a systems problem, that we silo and have this divisive competition of the different marginalized experiences in the world. And that's why we don't see it in the business. I'm definitely seeing outside the business, but it's harder in the business. And that's because there is a lack of resource or a lack of understanding from the very top of the business that we need to have universally inclusive cultures, not this sort of siloed approach. That's my experience.
That when the archetypal business leader who doesn't want to be a member of Valuable 500 goes home, he's not attacked by his wife, his lover, his brother, or his sister, right? His approach, or her approach, her assumptions are reinforced on a daily basis, which is why your work on representation and portrayal in the media is so important. But I don't want to go down that trail because that's another podcast in its own right.
It definitely is.
I want to come back to the question, how do you persuade disbelievers? Because what you're just saying, there are a lot of people out there yet who have yet to get the big message that this is a strategic priority for business, improving your performance as an employer of everyone, as a service provider to every customer, and as a corporate citizen. Right? So how do you persuade disbelievers? What is it that you've done that's different that caused you to at least persuade 500 in that initial exercise? I mean, what, you had 2,000, 1,500 say no when the ask was free, right? That gives an indication of how hard it was, but you persuaded 500 to sign up. How do you persuade disbelievers?
1,000 to get 500. So, that's not exactly the world's greatest success, but it is successful when you consider the scale of the Valuable 500 and who we have.
No, stop. I'm saying it's a miracle you got 500.
Thank you.
That's what I'm saying.
No, I know, but it also is, let's not ever walk away from the issue that there were 1,500 who said no. Let me give you maybe two or three what landed. Number one, never underestimate two really important factors: safety in numbers and fear of missing out. They're two very two very important levers in creating a collective of the scale of the Valuable 500. And how it began was because when you have a leader like Paul Pullman, who was the CEO of Unilever at the time, one and still remains one of our greatest business leaders, and you had a stage, the main stage of Davos, the World Economic Forum, you were messaging something. So that's where the fear of missing out was. And it was like, whoa, hold on, what is this? Because disability had often been always an aside event. And as you said, often a HR person. But this was, we had Paul Pullman and we had Richard Branson and we had Janet Rico from Omnicom and Jeff Dodds from Virgin Media and the main stage of the World Economic Forum. So it was a great start. So that was the first key thing. The second way to persuade, and I'm going to say this absolutely, I will not apologize for using the humanity of talking to the CEO as, yeah, you're a CEO, but you're a mother, father, sister, brother, husband, wife. Now you please just look around you and where does disability show up? And you are in a position of privilege. And this is your opportunity to leave legacy. And then followed it up with the business case, which, I don't think we should be making a business case for this anymore, but it was the duality of both. And then thirdly, I will say we created a brand and energy and excitement. So we campaigned really well and we had the disability community very much part of it. And lastly, and truthfully and honestly, I have a lived experience and I was willing to speak anywhere and everywhere to speak about the importance of this as a person And I spoke with an open heart, really. And then you must remember COVID. I just want to never underplay the COVID situation, because too many times in the past, we have spoken about accommodations and people with disabilities, and it was so complex and difficult. And why would they ever want, how could we ever allow them work from home? And then in 17 days, the business system made accommodations for everybody to work remotely. So you can see those sort of 5 things is probably what made this happen, you know. And
Watched you for a while now. I won't say for how long. What I've always observed is you bring those 3 things together. Yes, your personal experience, because that makes it real and imaginable. Because all too often we're talking about 1 billion people. How do you visualize and make
mm-hmm.
it's too big a number and it's too vague? Secondly, of course, you've got a justice message. You talked about the disability equality crisis.
Yeah.
World where we've lost track of the fact that actually people are entitled to be.
Mm-hmm.
Your business case reference, you know, I can remember a guy in a wheelchair saying to me at one conference, "Why do you need a business case for treating me properly?" Sort of a good question. But the third thing was, so you've got personal stories, you've got an instinct for justice, which very, you know, either the senior executive we're talking to has an instinct for justice or recognizes it, even if he doesn't. And the third thing is that you've got the personal connection, the insight that this human being you're talking to will have people with disabilities around him. And, you know, when we were talking about how you persuade disbelievers, and I was saying, I don't think I could have nurtured a business disability network in the UK if I had to do it through Zoom. You can't do that. How many times, chief exec, I'm thinking of a guy with an IT company. We had the conversation about why he should give me, you know, £20,000 to become an elite member and he would get all the benefits, etc. He said, "Well, I'll certainly think about it." And then as we paused and I was about to walk out the door, he said, "Well, actually, Susan, you know, my grandson's got dyslexia." So we had a whole conversation about his grandson. And before you know it, they're members, because he managed to see the connection, his
Exactly.
life issue, the justice, and the opportunity in terms of the business. But bringing them together is quite an art form, I would suggest.
And I think what case, you must remember the Valuable 500, we're not asking for membership fees. It was free to join the Valuable 500. And the reason is, I used to say to them, I don't want your money. I want your accountable intention. I want your attention and intention. I want you to give the money to organizations like Business Disability Forum or My Ability in Germany or Enable India or wherever around the world. But I want your intention, attention, and to come together as a collective force to have unstoppable transformation. Because the secret of the Valuable 500, it is simple acts done multiples of time by a collective that actually could put a dent in the system. And that to me is what, so yeah, you're right, the sense of justice, but also for me, the sense of kind of troublemaking and being part of a collective together, because there's a human yearning to belong and be part of something, and don't ever underestimate that. So I think that was very important too.
And your point about enabling these business leaders to develop the personal confidence to start to do stuff that's never been done before in their organization, to be able to justify waking up one morning as a social worker, you've decided to do what? And justify their behavior to a board that's, you know, playing those games about all we care about is da, da, da. And so that personal confidence comes about when you meet and talk and learn directly from people with disabilities. And that's the only way it comes about, which is my way of then saying, and hence we've also benefited from the
business case, which, you know, I don't think we should be making a business case for this anymore, but it was the duality of both. And then thirdly, I will say we created a brand and energy and excitement. So we campaigned really well. And we had the disability community very much part of it. And lastly, and truthfully and honestly, I have a lived experience, and I was willing to speak anywhere and everywhere to speak about the importance of this as a person And I spoke with an open heart, really. And then you must remember COVID. I just want to never underplay the COVID situation, because too many times in the past, we have spoken about the accommodations and people with disabilities, and it was so complex and difficult. And why would they ever want, how could we ever allow them work from home? And then in 17 days, the business system made accommodations for everybody to work remotely. So you can see those sort of 5 things is probably what made this happen, you know. And
watched you for a while now. I won't say for how long. What I've always observed is you bring those 3 things together. Yes, your personal experience, because that makes it real and imaginable. Because all too often we're talking about 1 billion people. How do you visualize and make it too big a number and it's too vague? Secondly, of course, you've got a justice message. You talked about the disability equality crisis.
yeah,
World where we've lost track of the fact that actually people are entitled to be. Your business case reference, you know, I can remember a guy in a wheelchair saying to me at one conference, "Why do you need a business case for treating me properly?" Sort of a good question. But the third thing was, so you've got personal stories, you've got an instinct for justice, which very, you know, either the senior executive we're talking to has an instinct for justice or recognizes it, even if he doesn't. And the third thing is that you've got the personal connection, the insight that this human being you're talking to will have people with disabilities around him. And, you know, when we were talking about how you persuade disbelievers, and I was saying, I don't think I could have nurtured a business disability network in the UK if I had to do it through Zoom. You can't do that. How many times, chief exec, I'm thinking of a guy with an IT company. We had the conversation about why he should give me, you know, £20,000 to become an elite member and he would get all the benefits, etc. He said, "Well, I'll certainly think about it." And then as we paused and I was about to walk out the door, he said, "Well, actually, Susan, you know, my grandson's got dyslexia." So we had a whole conversation about his grandson. And before you know it, they're members, because he managed to see the connection, his life issue, the justice, and the opportunity in terms of the business. But bringing them together is quite an art form, I would suggest.
And I think what case you must remember, the Valuable 500, we're not asking for membership fees. It was free to join the Valuable 500. And the reason is, I used to say to them, I don't want your money. I want your accountable intention. I want your attention and intention. I want you to give the money to organizations like Business Disability Forum or My Ability in Germany or Enable India or wherever around the world. But I want your intention, attention, and to come together as a collective force to have unstoppable transformation. Because the secret of the Valuable 500, it is simple acts done multiples of time by a collective that actually could put a dent in the system. And that to me is what, so yeah, you're right, the sense of justice, but also for me, the sense of kind of troublemaking and being part of a collective together, because there's a human yearning to belong and be part of something, and don't ever underestimate that. So I think that was very important too.
And your point about enabling these business leaders to develop the personal confidence to start to do stuff that's never been done before in their organization, to be able to justify waking up one morning as a social worker, you decided to do what? And justify their behavior to a board that, you know, playing those games about all we care about is da, da, da. And so that personal confidence comes about when you meet and talk and learn directly from people with disabilities. And that's the only way it comes about, which is my way of then saying, and hence we've also benefited from the growth of the disability ERG movement, the work that Purple Space and Kate Nash have been doing, where the senior players are now talking to their own people with disabilities, getting a completely different understanding of the impact.
No, that's, so it's like Kate Nash, who, I mean, we both absolutely love her. So, but the magic between Purple Space and Valuable 500, can you feel it? Like, so you have the voice of the employees who are in those businesses, but now they have the open ears and the the intentionality of the leadership to listen, to learn, to admit that they don't know. So bringing, we could fix it. This is so fixable when you bring the power of the intelligence of the employees to the open ears and open doors of those CEOs, right? Because there you go. We can't do it just with CEOs, can't. And we can't do it just with employees. But organizations like Purple Space and Valuable 500 coming together, like that's gold dust.
And as you say, it's when they come together and you get a leader to leader relationship rather than the more hierarchical assumption about how disabled employees are always, front of house, low entry level jobs. And it turns out that actually you've got your chief marketing officer is now prepared to tell you that she has a disability because she trusts you with the information, and everybody is developing that confidence in a positive outcome that transforms the discourse on them.
I want to pick up on that because it's so important. Like, you're the person who came up with the term disability confidence, and it's just all around the world, right? And it's such a powerful term because the reason so many organizations and human beings don't touch this topic of disability, don't deal with the topic of disability, is for shame, for fear of getting it wrong, for not knowing what to do, for being completely underconfident, right? So that term is so powerful. But then we bring it to one of the most powerful things that I have seen since the Valuable 500 has started is when senior executives and CEOs are disclosing their own lived experience in front of their employees and peers, and the transformative effect of that. Like, you cannot measure that. So when a CEO of one of our Valuable 500 companies on stages in Davos, on press conferences, actually for the first time publicly said, well, here's my experience, I have lived with this, and has the confidence to do that. It gives permission for others to do the same, but it also then changes the conversation internally in the organization, which therefore the E or G groups, it's like multiplying the possibility of change, right? And that, I mean, like, never underestimate the power of that, of bringing confidence to personal story.
Coming back to your point about the collective action, giving an individual business leader the confidence that he can say to his board, I'm going to do this, but so are all my competitors and my clients. And
exactly.
Absolutely. And so for me, what's been very satisfying is watching the growth of the National Business Disability Network movement, if you like, nurtured by Jürgen and the team at the ILO's Global Business Network. So we've got something like 40 now that are part of that community of interest, national networks, bringing companies together to get their own act together, if you like, as one stakeholder group, who then build partnerships with the organizations of disabled peoples and networks, and with the employer federations locally, and with the training providers, and start to say it's time to shape job markets that make it easier for the well-intentioned employer to actually find the disabled talent with the skills they're looking for. It's that collective approach, groups of companies looking at why is it so hard for us to find good people with disabilities with the skills we need here. We need to fix the system. And that can only then be done as a collective of companies.
I've always had that model. I think that's something that we connected on as from the very beginning, the power of a collective. I mean, not one company or CEO, no matter how incredible they are, can change the system. It needs the collective, and it needs a global, because the global experience of disability is so different from one country, one culture, one context. And the scale of the issue and the problem of global disability exclusion requires collective action, whether that's in governments, civil society, business. But it's something you and I have always believed in. And I also believe it stops us having a hero, it stops it being a one person thing. Because disability is a tiny word which covers so much lived experience. And we can't have one person to do it, right? We just can't. And that's why collective is so important. And I think it's where that intention from the community came from. Nothing about us without us. Us being the underlying word.
The building the disability confidence of a business, which I defined as you understand the impact of disability on your business and you're barrier-free for groups and you adapt for individuals, which just happens to be where I got that covert human rights campaigner, because that's the strategy in disguise, right? That's what you do. We need to be building the business confidence of the disability sector.
Expression that you've said when I was interviewing you a few years ago in Zero about how the disability community needs to help business. I think, what was the...
Yes, right. Making it easier for those organizations as valued service users, not targets, not the problem, but as valued stakeholders, making it easy for them to say yes. And so there's an area for business partnership there that I think is going to emerge soon.
Community, which brings us back to, are we covert? A human rights activist, mind you, I don't think I'm covert, but you know what I mean? We have to bring places and spaces where the disability community has that confidence to drive their expectations forward. But I do see, Susan, I don't know if, are you seeing it? But the younger generation, for me, when I was 20 years old, I didn't see anybody like me. That's why I hid in the disability closet so long. Whereas I see this younger generation, oh my God, I'm so grateful for them being proud, so proud about their experience. And I hope that it's really, that will bring that change too, because they have the confidence to bring their voice and their value and their self-worth to the table. So I'm hoping that will bring around a change as well, because I do think in the past, many of us, me included, didn't know how to own our disability with a sense of pride and self-worth,
It's a very important point. I think on that note, I'm going to ask, as we bring this conversation to a close, because we could keep going now for...
We could, for always.
I want to, I'm conscious that there may be people listening who are starting out thinking about, how do I influence my own employer? How do I influence the business community? How do I transform the way people look at their world? Because that's really what we're doing. At the moment, many of the people we want to influence, when they look at their world, they don't see disability. It's just not there. It's off to one side, taken care of by others. So what kind of advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, wanting to learn from our experience? Are there any particular don'ts or any particular do's that quickly come to mind?
Podcast in itself, for sure. For anybody who is willing to come into this sector and to be an innovator and a disruptor, you have to know that you cannot take failure personally. Because when you're innovating, you're doing something that others haven't done. You're going to face a lot of closed doors. And it can be very lonely. It can be very difficult. And I mean, Susan, you have helped me hugely through those, those dark hours of loneliness, and whether you're wondering, what am I doing and what am I doing it for? Because though things like the valuable 500 from the outside might look all done and complete, and it wasn't easy. So my invitation to anybody or advice is really know why you're doing this work. Understand and know why you're doing it. Do your own work on yourself first. You can only work, I think, in this space with a sense of that you understand, know and love yourself, because it's a really hard space to be in. I do think surround yourself by people who will both challenge you and love you at the same time. And in my case, you're one of them, and that's very, very important. You also need to know how to navigate different audiences. So you need to know how to read the room. It's not enough to be right. It's not enough that, that you have the argument for justice. You have to not make somebody else wrong in this quest. You've got to find a common ground, and you've got to understand that different audiences have a different way of connecting. So that's really, like, it's a really important thing. And the most important of all is, will you please celebrate your wins? Because, you know, I would say to my younger self, you know, you're not going to solve it all. So could you just take a moment to recognize the things that you've done before you think you've got to go on to the next thing, you know, and stop being so hard on yourself.
And I thought you were going to say laughter and humor.
Well, I was. I mean, the celebration is through joy. And you know, anybody listening is listening to a friendship. You know, this is a long-standing friendship between Susan and I. And I will honestly say what is my most favorite part of Susan and I, because people don't know Susan and I really. You know, you might have an idea. Do you know what? We laugh. And I think we laugh with the dark humors of the darkest moments. We laugh and we bring joy. And yeah, you've got to find the joy. You've got to find, and the reason I'm still in this space, here's the voice and here's the wobble, because I love this work and I believe it's possible. And I love the friends, of which you're one, that I have found to navigate what we do.
Well, I certainly can't top that as a suggestion for what someone just starting out might want to listen to. So thank you very much, Caroline Casey.
Thank you very much, Susan Scott Parker, SSP.
If you found this content relevant and perhaps even thought-provoking, please feel free to share with your networks.